The town of Red Hollow hadn't seen rain in 6 months. Dust hung in the air like smoke, and every footstep sounded hollow on the cracked earth. At the edge of the main street stood a wooden stage, splintered, sun-beaten, and surrounded by men who'd long forgotten what mercy looked like. They were auctioning women again. Jonas Creed watched from his horse, a shadow among the crowd. He wasn't there for a bride. Not really. He was there because silence had followed him for too long, and sometimes silence needed breaking. The sheriff barked prices, the crowd shouted, laughter echoing like gunfire. One by one, women were led up, pale and shaking, debts and despair written on their faces. Then she stepped out, a woman in a torn gray shawl, head down, hands bound. No one knew her name, only that she'd been found on the North Ridge 2 days earlier, half-starved and nearly frozen. When she tried to speak, nothing came out. Her voice was gone. The sheriff called her the Silent One, said she'd work hard, never talk back. A man's dream, some joked. But Jonas didn't laugh. There was something about the way she stood, shoulders squared, defiant even in her silence, that pulled at something buried deep in him. A memory, blurred by time and snow. A whisper in the dark, years ago. Don't move. You're safe now. He shook it off. Couldn't be. $2, someone shouted. 3, said another. Then, before he could stop himself, Jonas raised his hand. $3, he said, his voice rough. The crowd went quiet. The sheriff grinned, slammed his gavel against the wood. Sold. To Mr. Creed. She didn't flinch, didn't look at him, just turned her face slightly toward the wind, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw a scar, a faint white line beneath her jaw. It tugged at his chest like a hook, because somewhere, deep down, he knew he'd seen that scar before. He took the rope from the sheriff, the rough hemp biting into his calloused hands. As she stepped down, she stumbled once, her knees trembling. Jonas caught her before she fell, and when his hand touched hers, something in him went still. Cold, familiar, like touching the past itself. He didn't speak, neither did she, but as they walked away from Red Hollow, dust swirling behind them, the town fading into the heat, Jonas couldn't shake one thought from his mind. Why did her silence sound so much like a memory? The sun was sinking low when they left Red Hollow behind. A crimson haze settled over the prairie, stretching shadows long across the trail. Jonas rode ahead, the woman walking behind the wagon, her hands still bound loosely at the wrist. He'd offered her the front seat twice. Both times she shook her head. She hadn't spoken a single word since the auction. Not a sound. Only the wind moved between them, whistling through dry grass and broken fences. Jonas wasn't sure why he'd bought her. He told himself it was pity, maybe decency. But deep down he knew better. It was the scar, that small, pale mark beneath her jaw, catching the dying light like a secret he wasn't supposed to remember. He guided the horses through a narrow ravine, the wheels creaking against the rocks. When the wagon hit a rut, she stumbled. He turned just in time to see her fall. He jumped down, dust swirling around his boots. Easy, he said, reaching to steady her. Her eyes met his for the first time. Brown, deep, steady. The kind of eyes that had seen too much and carried it all in silence. He noticed then, she wasn't afraid of him. Not like the others at that auction. No, there was something else in her gaze. Recognition. A flicker, like she'd seen his face somewhere before and couldn't believe it. Jonas stepped back. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, lips parting, but no sound came out. Just a faint rasp, like a voice once used and long forgotten. He sighed. "Fine. You don't have to talk. Not yet." He cut the rope from her wrists. "Don't run. There's nothing but desert for miles." She nodded once, eyes never leaving his. As they rode deeper into the dusk, the night wind grew colder. Coyotes called from somewhere far off, and the stars began to bloom across the dark. Jonas lit a lantern, setting it at the edge of the wagon. The glow caught her face for a moment, and he saw it again. That same scar, that same steadiness. And then, like a flash through fog, he remembered the smell of pine and gunpowder, the sound of rain on metal, and a woman's voice, soft but certain. "You're safe now. Keep your eyes closed." He blinked hard. The moment was gone. She was staring out at the road again, silent as stone. Jonas clenched the reins, breath tight in his chest. Because if his memory was right, the woman who'd said those words had vanished in the storm 3 years ago, and no one ever found her body. He looked at her again, the flicker of the lantern catching the scar beneath her jaw. And for the first time in 3 years, Jonas Creed felt afraid. Sleep didn't come easy on the trail. Not for men like Jonas Creed. Not after what he'd done and what he'd lost. By the time the wagon reached Blackthorn Creek, night had fallen thick and cold. He led the horses into the barn, unhitched the reins, and watched the woman climb down without help. She moved slow but sure, like someone used to pain. Jonas nodded toward the small cabin nearby. "That's home," he said. "Ain't much, but it keeps out the rain." She glanced at the door, then back at him, eyes cautious, unreadable. Inside, the fire crackled low. Jonas poured coffee, set a tin cup in front of her. She took it with both hands, warming her fingers against the steam. Still, no words. Only that silence. That same silence he remembered from the storm. 3 years earlier, a storm had rolled down from the north like a living thing, all wind and teeth. Jonas had been a different man then. Meaner, younger, hungry for gold. He'd been hired to run supplies through the mountains, bandits at his tail, and frost biting his lungs. When the ambush came, he never saw it. A gunshot, a horse scream, then darkness. He woke to pain, his leg torn open, his gun lost in the snow. He tried to crawl, but every inch burned. That's when he heard her, a voice cutting through the wind. "Calm, firm, don't move. You're safe now." Through the blur of snow, he saw a figure, small, hooded, moving quick. She pressed cloth to his wound, her hand steady even as her breath came short and ragged. He tried to speak, but she shook her head. "Save your strength." Her face was hidden by the stormlight, only her eyes clear, dark, determined, alive. She stayed with him through the night, whispering when the pain grew worse. He remembered her scent, smoke, rain, and pine. And when morning came, she was gone. Only footprints leading into the snow. They told him later a woman had been found dead near the ridge. Same direction, same storm. He'd buried the memory with his guilt until tonight. The fire in the cabin popped, snapping Jonas back to the present. The woman was staring into the flames, the light tracing that same scar along her jaw. He couldn't take his eyes off it, off her. He swallowed hard. "Tell me," he said quietly, "have we met before?" She froze. Her fingers tightened around the cup. Then she shook her head, slow, careful. But her hands were trembling. Jonas looked down. On her wrist, beneath the sleeve, he saw a thin band of burned skin. The kind rope leaves when pulled too tight too long ago. The same kind he'd seen that night, when she'd pulled him out of the wreck and tied a tourniquet with her own scarf. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Outside, thunder rolled far off in the distance, as if the storm he'd tried to forget was finding its way back. And for the first time, Jonas wondered if he'd just brought a ghost home. The storm rolled in that night without warning. Wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls, carrying dust and memories with it. Jonas sat by the fire, sharpening his knife out of habit more than need. The woman, still nameless, was mending an old blanket, the needle flashing in the firelight. Each pull of the thread made the silence feel heavier. He wanted to ask again, "Who are you?" But something in her quiet told him not to. Instead, he studied her hands. They were strong, but marked by scars that didn't belong to a farmer's wife. One along the thumb, another near the wrist. Old wounds, healed long ago. "Storm will pass by morning," Jonas said. She nodded once, eyes still on her stitching. He leaned back, watching her from the corner of his eye. The light made her hair gleam like polished oak, and for a second, he caught that same scent, smoke and pine. It made his chest ache. When he looked away, his gaze fell on the table beside her. There, half hidden under her shawl, was something small and weathered. He leaned forward. A wooden charm, carved in the shape of a sparrow. He'd seen it before, years ago, hanging from the saddle of the woman who'd saved him. Jonas froze. His knife slipped, the blade biting his thumb. Blood welled up instantly. The woman looked up. Her eyes widened. Without hesitation, she moved to him, took his hand gently, and pressed a strip of cloth against the cut. It was the same touch, the same firm, careful pressure from that night in the snow. Jonas didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched her, the fire flickering between them, shadows dancing on the walls. When she let go, her hand lingered a heartbeat too long. Then she turned away, hiding her face. Jonas looked down at the cloth wrapped around his thumb. It wasn't from the blanket. It was torn from her own sleeve. He exhaled slowly. "All right," he murmured. "You're not going to talk. That's fine. But I've seen that charm before." She froze. Didn't turn. Didn't breathe. He stood up, walked to the table, and picked up the tiny sparrow. The wood was smooth from years of touch, the edges worn. He remembered her voice again, faint under the wind. "If you make out alive, find me by the creek." Jonas set the charm down, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Was that you?" No answer, only the crackle of fire and the slow, quiet sound of her breath catching her throat. Then, barely audible, he heard it. A single word. "Hoarse. Fragile." "Yes." Jonas turned sharply. She was staring into the fire, tears glinting in her eyes. Her voice trembled as if it had been locked away for years. Then, just as quickly, she went silent again. The storm outside roared louder, slamming against the cabin door. Jonas felt his pulse in his ears, the truth pressing close but still out of reach. She had spoken one word, and it was enough to change everything. The storm raged through the night, but inside the cabin, it was her silence that made the air heavy. Jonas didn't sleep. He sat by the dying fire, listening to the wind claw at the shutters. Every now and then, he'd glance toward her corner, where she sat curled in a blanket, eyes half open, watching the flames. That one word, "yes," still echoed in his head. A single syllable that had cracked 3 years of certainty wide open. Morning came pale and cold. When Jonas stepped outside, the world was washed clean by rain. He walked to the barn, fed the horses, trying to outrun the questions circling his mind. But they followed him like ghosts. Who was she really? Why'd she come back? And why? If she'd saved him once, was she running now? When he returned, she was standing by the window. Her shawl was gone, her hair loose, and for the first time, sunlight touched her face. She looked younger somehow, but there was fear behind her calm. The kind you don't get from storms, only from people. Jonas cleared his throat. "You remember me," he said softly. She turned, hesitated, then nodded. He took a step closer. "You pulled me out of that snow. You kept me alive." Her lips parted as if to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached for a small pouch at her waist, untied it, and spilled its contents onto the table. A few coins, a rusted locket, and a folded paper so thin it nearly tore. Jonas picked it up, unfolded it carefully. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch of a man's face, his own. He froze. It was rough, but exact. The scar under his eye, the sharp nose, the same hollow stare. He looked up, voice low. "You've been carrying this?" She nodded again. Jonas' chest tightened. "Why?" Her hand moved slowly to her throat, tracing the faint scar hidden beneath the collar. Then she looked at him with that same calm, broken strength. She mouthed 2 words. He watched closely. They followed. Jonas' stomach dropped. "Who?" She shook her head, stepped back toward the door, eyes scanning the trees beyond the cabin. Her hands trembled now, but not from cold. It was fear, a fear that had nothing to do with him, and everything to do with whatever she'd brought with her. Jonas went still, the soldier in him waking again. He checked his rifle, thumbed the chamber, and looked out across the field. There, near the ridge, he saw it. A glint of metal. A man on horseback, too still to be a traveler. Jonas turned to her. "Tell me the truth. Are they coming for you?" She didn't nod, didn't shake her head, just close her eyes, and let a single tear slide down her cheek. Outside, the wind shifted. The sound of hooves echoed faintly across the hills. Jonas drew in a slow breath. The past wasn't just following her. It had finally found them both. By dusk, the wind had died, but the air felt wrong. Too still, too heavy. Jonas knew that feeling. He'd felt it before every ambush, every gunfight that ever went bad. The woman, silent as always, stood by the doorway, her eyes locked on the horizon. She didn't need words. The way her shoulders tightened said enough. They were close. Jonas moved with purpose. Checked the rifle. Loaded the revolver. Every sound in the cabin was too loud. The click of brass, the thud of boots, the heartbeat in his own ears. "Get down by the hearth," he said quietly. She hesitated, then obeyed. He doused the lantern, the fire dying into ash. Outside, the world slipped into gray, the last of the daylight melting behind the trees. Then came a sound, distant hooves, steady measured. Not a traveler's rhythm, a hunt's. Jonas crept to the window, lifted the curtain just an inch. 3 riders, dark coats. One carried a lantern, swinging low from the saddle. He felt the cold crawl up his spine. He knew that formation. Baxter's men. The same outlaws who'd left him for dead 3 winters ago. The same storm he'd met her in. He turned, breath shallow. "They're not here for you," he whispered. "They're here for me." But her eyes said otherwise. She shook her head hard, lips moving soundlessly. "No for me." Jonas frowned. "What do you mean?" She grabbed a piece of charcoal from the hearth and scrawled on the floorboards with trembling hands. "They think I killed Baxter." Jonas stared. "What?" Before she could finish, the dogs outside began to bark. A gun cocked. Voices carried on the wind. Low, confident, cruel. "She's in there," someone shouted. "Bring her out." Jonas' blood turned to ice. He moved fast, pulling her toward the trapdoor under the rug. "Root cellar," he hissed. "Go." She shook her head, grabbed his arm, and mouthed again, "No, they'll kill you." He didn't have time to argue. He pushed her down into the dark, covering the hatch just as the door burst open. Wood splintered. Lantern light spilled across the cabin. 3 men stepped in, guns drawn, eyes hard. Well, the lead one sneered. "Look what the storm blew back." Jonas smiled without humor. "Didn't think you'd come all this way just to die twice." The man's grin faded. "Where is she?" Jonas' fingers slid toward the trigger. "She's gone." The outlaw's eyes flicked around the room. "Liar." The barrel of the gun lifted toward Jonas' chest. And in that frozen moment, when death leaned in again, Jonas heard something move beneath the floorboards. A breath. A whisper. Then, a gunshot shattered the dark. The gunshot cracked through the cabin like thunder. One man dropped instantly, hit clean through the throat. Jonas didn't hesitate. He dove behind the table, returned fire, wood splintering around him. The lantern shattered, and the room fell into chaos. Shadows, sparks, and gun smoke dancing in violent rhythm. The second outlaw lunged toward the hearth, firing blind. Jonas rolled, came up on one knee, and put a bullet through his chest. Only one remained. The leader, Baxter's right hand, the man with the scar running down his jaw. He snarled through the haze, rifle raised. "You always had bad luck, Hartwell." Jonas fired. Click. Empty. The outlaw smirked. But before he could pull the trigger, a blade flashed from the darkness behind him. He stiffened. Blood welled at his throat. And as he fell, she stood behind him. The woman, trembling, holding a knife slick with red. Jonas froze. She climbed out through the back cellar hatch silently. And now she stood there, chest heaving, eyes wild with something between fury and grief. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain tapping the roof and the dying breath of the man at their feet. Finally, Jonas found his voice. "You saved me again." She didn't answer. Instead, she crouched beside the outlaw, pulling something from his coat pocket. A small silver pin, shaped like a sparrow, wings spread wide. Jonas frowned. "What's that?" She stared at it, her fingers trembling. Then she whispered, her voice breaking through the silence for the first time. "It's their mark." Jonas blinked. "Whose?" Her eyes lifted to his. "The men who killed Baxter. The ones who burned my home. The ones who—" Her voice cracked. "The ones I ran from." Jonas felt the world shift beneath his boots. "So you didn't kill him?" She shook her head. "No, I loved him." The fire popped softly, echoing like a gunshot. Jonas took a step back. Everything inside him twisted. The guilt, the confusion, the impossible truth. He whispered, "Then why come here? Why come here? Why find me?" She looked at him, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. "Because they think I know where you hid the gold." Jonas' breath caught. He hadn't heard that word gold in years. The secret he'd buried with his past, the one only 3 men had known about. 2 were dead. Now somehow she knew. His voice dropped low, almost a growl. "Who told you that?" She hesitated, then held his stare. "Baxter did, before he died." Jonas felt the blood drain from his face. Outside, thunder rolled again, and for the first time in years, he realized the storm wasn't done with them yet. Rain whispered against the cabin walls long after the gunfire died. Jonas sat on the edge of the table, staring at the silver sparrow pin between his fingers. It gleamed faintly in the firelight, a cruel reminder of a story he thought he'd buried years ago. The woman, now resting by the hearth, watched him quietly. Her voice, soft but steady, cut through the heavy silence. "He told me you were the only one who could stop them." Jonas looked up slowly. "Stop who?" "The men who wore this," she said, nodding to the pin. "They were bounty riders once, then thieves, then killers. Baxter trusted them, until they betrayed him." Jonas' jaw tightened. He remembered Baxter, his old commanding officer, the man who'd saved him in the war, the man who'd turned to outlawing when peace brought no place for soldiers. Jonas exhaled. "I buried the gold for him. Not for greed. For loyalty." He stared into the flames. "He said it will buy freedom, a ranch, a second chance for us both." She leaned forward, her voice trembling. "And he told me the same thing." Jonas' eyes snapped to hers. For the first time, he saw it. Not just fear, but loss. She took a shaky breath. "When Baxter found me, I was nothing but a girl running from war. He gave me food, work, a name to hide behind. He said if anything ever happened to him, I was to find you and tell you where the gold was hidden." Jonas frowned. "He told you where?" She nodded slowly, then reached in her coat and pulled out a small, dirt-stained map. The ink had faded, but the outline was clear. A valley, a ridge, and one mark beneath a cluster of pine trees. Jonas felt his pulse quicken. "I remember this." She whispered. "He called it the Sparrow's Nest." Jonas stood, pacing. The storm outside had quieted, but lightning still flashed across the distant hills. "They'll come for it," he muttered. "Every last one of them." She nodded. "They already are." Jonas stopped. "What do you mean?" She looked at him, eyes wide and glassy. "There's more than 3 riders. I saw them, 10 maybe, camped near the ridge before I came here." Jonas' gut went cold. "Then we don't have much time." He grabbed the rifle, checked his rounds, and looked toward the door. But she rose, stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "You can't fight them all, Jonas." He met her gaze. "I can try." Her voice broke. "You'll die." He paused, the weight of her words pressing on him like the night air. Then he said softly, "Maybe, but I won't let them take what he died to protect." For a long moment, they just stood there, 2 people bound by the same ghost, the same man, the same storm. Finally, she whispered, "If we go for the gold, they'll follow. You know that." Jonas nodded. "That's the point." He threw on his coat, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and opened the door to the dark. Rain dripped from the eaves. The forest loomed black and endless. He turned to her one last time. "You said you saved my life once," he said. "Let's see if we can save it twice." She hesitated, then stepped out after him. The door swung shut behind them. And somewhere deep in the pines, a lantern flickered. Watching, waiting. They rode through the night under a sky heavy with stars. The rain had passed, but the ground still shimmered with silver puddles, reflecting the moon like broken glass. Jonas rode ahead, rifle across his lap, every muscle tense. The woman, silent, steady, kept pace beside him, her face half hidden beneath her hood. Neither spoke for miles. Only the sound of hooves and wind filled the silence. At dawn, they reached the ridge. Below them lay the valley, wild, green, and haunted by mist, the kind of place the world forgot. Jonas dismounted, scanning the tree line. Every pine whispered. Every branch looked like a rifle waiting to rise. He pointed toward a narrow hollow at the valley's edge. "There," he said. "That's the Sparrow's Nest." She nodded. Her voice came soft. Do you ever wish you'd never found it? Jonas didn't answer. He started down the slope, boots sinking in wet earth. But in truth, her question followed him with every step. They reached the grove by noon. A ring of tall pines surrounded a single patch of ground, sunlit and still. Jonas knelt, brushed away leaves, and dug with his hands until his fingers hit something solid. A wooden chest, old, marked with the same sparrow emblem. He exhaled slowly. It's real. Together, they pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay gold bars, dull and heavy with age. Dozens of them, enough to buy 10 lives. But beneath the gold was something else. A letter, folded, sealed in wax. Jonas lifted it, his name scratched across the front in Baxter's handwriting. His throat tightened. He opened it carefully, eyes tracing each line. If you're reading this, old friend, I'm gone. I never meant for the gold to damn us both. It was meant for her, so she could start again, far from the men who ruined us. Protect her. She's worth more than any treasure. Jonas' breath caught. He looked up at her, the paper trembling in his hand. Baxter wanted you to have it. She shook her head, eyes glistening. No, I just wanted the truth. A gun cocked behind them. Jonas froze. From the tree lean, shadows moved, riders emerging one by one. 10 of them, faces half-covered, rifles gleaming in the light. Jonas rose slowly, hands out. The lead rider dismounted, stepping forward with a grin. Well, he drawled, look who dug up our payday. Jonas' eyes hardened. You boys always did show up late to a fight. The outlaw smirked. Hand over the gold. Maybe we'll let you keep breathing. The woman stepped closer to Jonas, whispering. There's too many. Jonas didn't move, didn't blink. He whispered back. Then we make every bullet count. And as the first man raised his gun, Jonas fired. The valley exploded with thunder. Smoke, dirt, and screams filled the air. Jonas and the woman ducked behind the chest, returning fire in bursts. Each shot echoed off the cliffs like the ghosts of old battles. But there were too many. They were surrounded. Jonas took a round to the shoulder, gritting his teeth. He turned, yelling, Run! Get to the ridge. She shook her head. I'm not leaving you again. Another shot tore through the air, and this time she went down. Jonas' world stopped. He dropped the rifle, crawled to her side. Blood stained her coat, warm against his trembling hands. She looked up at him, weak smile fading at the edges. Guess I saved you twice. Jonas' voice broke. Don't talk like that. But her eyes were already drifting toward the sky. The same sky that had watched them from the start. Gunfire still echoed in the distance. But Jonas heard only her last breath. And as her hand slipped from his, the storm returned. Low, distant thunder rolling through the valley like a dirge. The storm rolled through the valley all night. By morning, it left only silence. The kind that feels too heavy to breathe. Jonas sat beneath the pines, the woman's head resting gently in his lap. The gold lay forgotten beside them, dull and meaningless under the gray light. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. It was still warm, still soft, still hers. The letter from Baxter fluttered in the wind, words smudged by rain and blood. Jonas read it one last time, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her hand. You kept your promise, he whispered, and I'll keep mine. He dug a grave beneath the oldest pine, the one that leaned west, its roots twisted like the lines of an old map. He laid her to rest there, wrapped in his coat. Above her, he carved just one thing into the wood. The sparrow sleeps. The sky broke open again, letting sunlight spill through the clouds. It touched her grave like a final blessing. Jonas stood there for a long time, rifle in hand, the wind tugging at his coat. Somewhere beyond the ridge, he heard the faint echo of hooves. More men, or ghosts, maybe both. He turned once more toward the grave. I'll finish it, he said softly. I'll find the rest of them. For you. For Baxter. Then he picked up his hat, slid it low over his eyes, and walked into the mist. Each step faded into the sound of rain and wind. Until he was gone, the camera would linger there, on the lonely pine, the grave beneath it, and a single silver sparrow pin glinting faintly in the dirt. Then, As the wind carried the last echo of his footsteps, a voice, older now, softer, would speak. Some stories don't end. They just ride on, carried by the ones who still remember. Fade to black. Then on screen, The Sparrow's Promise. If this story touched you, hit subscribe. There are more tales still riding the wind.